Perry Bellegarde, good to have you back. At the meeting, can you give us any news about what Prince Charles may have said about reconciliation and if there was a request for an apology?
Well, at this meeting that I just concluded here, it wasn't about an apology or anything like that. It was more about how do we breathe life into dealing with the big issue of climate change that affects not only Canada but the world. And we focused on how do we bring public sector and private sector together, because governments can't do this alone. You need private sector involvement, private sector investments as well, and to deal with that. And how do First Nations people play a role in that? Because climate change is the biggest issue facing the world right now. And that's what we focused on. Prince Charles has been a champion. You know, he developed the Sustainable Markets Initiative a few years back. He developed the Terra Carta, and having different countries and institutions and companies sign on as well. And so we looked at that and focused on that right now, trying to find some solutions to keeping the 1.5 dream alive in terms of global warming at 1.5. So that's what we focused on here in the last hour or so with both leaders and champion around the table, NGOs and private sector CEOs and government officials.
Carl, Cassidy Caron is set to meet the Royals tonight. She's already said she's going to ask them for an apology. Is that important, Carl?
Yeah, I think it's crucial. I think the Crown should take as much accountability for its role in everything that's happened with Indigenous people. My people, the Six Nations people, will actually be commemorating Queen Victoria this weekend with Bread and Cheese Day, and we still respect that peace, friendship, and respect that's supposed to exist with the Crown. But the Crown has a responsibility to polish the Silver Covenant chain, which means renewing that relationship and taking responsibility for it. So, yeah, I don't think this is going to be a fun tour. And I think First Nations people are closer to where the people of Barbados are than other countries.
Meaning no apology. We're not polishing, as you say, the silver chain, but cutting it.
Yeah, I think the legitimacy of the Crown is at stake if they don't take accountability for the very direct role they've played in the attempted erasure of Indigenous people. I think they need to own it full-throatedly.
Ton, did you want to weigh in on the politics of this?
Well, I really want to hear what Perry has to say on that, because having talked about climate change, actually, we all want to know what you wanted to hear from them on the Indigenous reconciliation piece. But I would just say that politically, it was very clever how this whole visit was launched. And, of all places in Newfoundland, where there was an Indigenous population wiped out by the arrival of white settlers, there was a whole sort of plate laid for consideration of Indigenous concerns and affairs on this visit. They visited the government house there, and, very much it was a piece around Indigenous reconciliation, notwithstanding the other things. I mean, Charles loves Newfoundland. He's been there quite a few times. I covered him back in the 80s, I think, when he was there with his first wife. And, but he cares about the environment. And though this was very interesting, that they're basically setting him up to hear Indigenous stories, to hear the state of the political story here in Canada. And so, Perry, I really want to know what he said on that to you, if anything.
All right. Well, Perry, the good news is Perry's here. Go for it, Perry.
Well, I view this in a way that Canada has been a colony of Great Britain right up until 1982 with the patriation of the Constitution. And so definitely there's a colonial history and a colonial past. There's an imperialistic history, and we all know that historically. And we know that travesties from the residential school, the genocide of the residential schools, to the implementation of the Indian Act in 1876, and how we have to move all beyond that. For me, we say the Anglican Church has already apologized. They've done that. And for me, being from Treaty Number 4, the Victorian treaties, we have a reverence and a close relationship with the monarchy because of our treaty relationship with the Crown. Little Black Bear, my chief, entered into Treaty Number 4 on September 15, 1874, and it was a treaty about peaceful coexistence and mutual respect to mutually benefit and share the land and resource wealth. We didn't give up anything. But because we went through ceremony, and all of our chiefs went through ceremony, there's a sacredness and there's a covenant that was made with all of creation and God, Creator, and all of the spirit beings to witness that covenant. We have songs and prayers that were made up to honor the monarchy because of that covenant. And we hold on
but
to
does
that
the monarchy... But I guess, the question politically also for this government is, will the monarchy honor those relationships in a new way, in a more modern way?
Well, what we can do, because the monarchy, again, we have a constitutional monarchy in Canada. And basically, do the monarchs have any control and direct say over what a government does in a democratically elected government here in Canada? They're more symbolic more than anything. But they can use their position of influence.
But that's the point. Would the symbol of an apology?
My point is.
But would the symbol of an apology matter, Perry?
Basically, will that deal with the 40,000 children in foster care? Will that deal with better housing and education and healthcare for First Nations people? Will that deal with the 5 to 7 times the youth suicide that we have amongst our people? Will that deal with all the incarceration rates that are so high for First Nations women and men? An apology? We've got to figure out what we're going to do here in Canada to make those things go away so that we close the gap that exists. We can use their offices to help put pressure on nation-state governments to bring those policy and legislative changes about. So we have to work with them. Yes, there's no question it's a colonial history, a colonial past. There's no question. So how do we put pressure on nation-states now to deal with the injustices that First Nations, Indigenous peoples worldwide, globally, have had to endure? So that's a big task. I would say we have to push them in that front so that he can put pressure on Prime Minister Trudeau and Cabinet to do more to address those things I just espoused. So apology, we can push for that, sure. But I'd rather see some concrete measures to keep closing the gap that exists, because our treaty relationship with the Crown is international in nature, and we have to hang on to that. But it was all about sharing the land and resource wealth collectively together. And that's where I keep focusing my energy.
Okay, just last word to you, Carl. When you hear Perry Bellegarde say that, what's your view?
The erosion of the relationship has gone from a brother to brother relationship to a parent to child relationship. And so I think I need to hear the Crown say that we're siblings with them and that we're not their children anymore, and that we can sit at the table as partners. And sure, it's only words, but those words will go a long way to having meaning in our community right now. Otherwise, these symbols of Canada are simply worthless.
Okay, well, we'll find out what happens tonight. First of all, I really appreciate Perry Bellegarde joining us. I know it was a you rushed to get there after your meeting with the Prince and the Duchess and the Prime Minister. So thank you, Perry, for doing that. As always, love having you back on the program.